May 14th, 1948. World War II had ended a few years ago. Until this point, Palestine, now known as Israel, Transjordan, now known as Jordan, and Iraq had been under the control of the British Mandate. Today was the day before the British Mandate would officially expire, leaving each of the three countries to do it as they wished. On this historic day, within Palestine, in the city of Tel Aviv, newly elected Jewish Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion stood to give a speech before his new and very young nation. Within this speech, Prime Minister Ben-Gurion announced to the Jewish people that Israel would now become its own free and independent state, where all Jews would be accepted, and that the government would strive to develop the land for the good of all its residents and be based upon the foundations of liberty, justice, and peace, as well as that it would ensure social and political rights to all citizens without discrimination of religion, race, or sex. These are rights that we take for granted today, but in 1948 in the Middle East, those weren't always guaranteed, or anywhere else in the world for your average Jewish person. There were a few exceptions, though, such as the United States or Britain, but there weren't many. Now you might be wondering, if these rights were so hard to come by in this area of the world, how could Prime Minister Ben-Gurion simply just tell his people that they had them? Well, he couldn't. As you're about to see, the Jewish people had to fight a long and hard fight to keep their rights and to break through barriers of anti-Semitism that have repeatedly come at them. It was 1945. German dictator Adolf Hitler and his brutal Nazi regime had just been overthrown by the Allied powers in Europe. The Jews had been in Hitler's crosshairs of persecution ever since he first took power in Germany. Now, after 6 million of them had been killed, they were looking for a place to go, and Jewish immigration was on the rise since no one else seemed interested in taking them. Soon, a popular ideology known as Zionism gained popularity with Jewish people. Zionism is a political movement for the establishment and support of a national homeland for Jews in Palestine, now concerned chiefly with the development of the modern state of Israel. By the masses, ethnically Jewish people began migrating to the British Mandate of Palestine, now known as Israel. In no time, with all the Jewish immigrants flocking to Palestine, it became overpopulated. And with tensions rising and fear of violence, the UN held a meeting to find a resolution so that both parties would be happy. There were three prevailing solutions proposed by the UN. 1. Create a single multinational state. 2. Create an equal confederation with equal liberties for all, such as done with the Confederation of Yugoslavia. Or 3. Create two independent states of Israel and Palestine. Even though the Arabs did walk out of the UN meeting as a form of protest, the third resolution, one which they adamantly hated, was adopted. The plan would simply divide the Jewish state, which is blue, and the Arab state, which is green, and leave Jerusalem as a UN-controlled territory. And now, with even more Jews immigrating to Palestine, the local Palestinians soon became unhappy. This resulted in a civil war between the Jewish militias and the Palestinian guerrilla fighters. This war lasted for about 8 months before the Jews finally triumphed and secured land holdings in Palestine. If the Arabs hadn't been motivated to get rid of the Jews, they were now. Therefore, a meeting was held between King Farouk of Egypt, Emir Abdullah I of Transjordan, Prime Minister Sayyid Mohammed al-Sadr of Iraq, President Shukri al-Khulafi of Syria, and President Bakr el-Khoury of Lebanon came together and formed the Arab Legion. And for what? To wipe the new Jewish nation off the face of the planet. Now, on May 15th, the day after Prime Minister Ben-Gurion had declared Israel its own state. The 5 Arab countries came together and attacked Israel. This forced the new state to mobilize its entire resource base. All military-aged persons were conscripted to the IDF, or the other Jewish militias known as the Haganah, and the Irgun. They had once been rivals because they disagreed on the way that they should liberate the Jews from the Arabs, but they agreed to settle their differences for the better of the Jewish people. The first part of the war did not go well for Israel. While they had equal manpower as their enemies, the Arabs had more tanks and planes. If not for a UN intervention, the State of Israel would probably not exist today. But thanks to the UN intervention, the Israelis were able to import heavy armaments such as planes and tanks from Czechoslovakia, along with 25,000 rifles, 5,000 machine guns, and 50 million rounds of ammunition. After the 4-week UN-organized ceasefire and the fighting began, the Arabs soon began to realize that the Israeli military they were facing now was not the same one they had faced in the first round of the war. This one was more organized, better equipped, and more motivated than ever to win their freedom. And while this may have been true, the Arabs still had a war to win and a Jewish state to crush. The war continued to rage on, but soon the Arabs began to face division. Instead of thinking about crushing the Jews, they started thinking about how they could each expand their country's own borders. Israel recognized this weakness in the Arab League and capitalized on it. They took only a small fraction of their forces and used it to draw Egyptian forces away from the southern Negev region. In doing this, they were able to easily conquer it and secure a firm landholding in Palestine. On top of that, they soon swooped around behind Egyptian forces and trapped 10,000 Egyptian soldiers inside the Gaza Strip. Seeing this, King Farouk and the rest of the Egyptian military leadership realized that they would have to enter peace negotiations with Israel, or risk seeing its army destroyed. Finally, on February 24th, 1949, Egypt and Israel reached an armistice agreement. Seeing that the largest of the Arab nations had come to the table, the other Arab nations that had originally attacked Israel soon followed suit, each working out their own agreements with Israel. Iraq was the only country that never formally signed an armistice agreement with Israel. The soldiers they sent to the war were technically more support for the other nations, so they didn't need to sign an agreement. Geographically, Israel greatly benefited. They now controlled 78% of what used to be Palestine, now known as the State of Israel. While this victory secured Israeli independence, it came at a cost. Israel suffered about 6,000 soldiers killed in action, and about 15,000 wounded. The Arabs also took heavy casualties for such a short war, 10,000 plus killed in action. Although their wounded are unknown to statistics, it's safe to say that their wounded would definitely have outnumbered their dead. Remember back at the beginning of the video, where Prime Minister Ben-Gurion said that Israel would ensure social and political rights to all citizens without discrimination of religion, race, or sex. Now you might ask, did any of that happen? Did he really make a free democracy? The answer is yes. Today, Israel is a parliamentary democracy, meaning that all citizens have equal voting rights. And unlike some of its neighbors, Israel's government does not force a certain religion or religious laws on any of its citizens. Along with that, any law-abiding Israeli citizen can run for prime minister, a seat in the Knesset, or any other government position they so desire. It hasn't always been easy for Israel. They've had to fight wars both with their neighbors and with terror groups. But even after all that, they've still lived up to the promise Prime Minister Ben-Gurion made to his people so long ago.